Let's talk about networking in a straightforward, candid way. When most people hear the word networking, there's a bit of cringe. For many people who have built their careers in a time where you got opportunities by doing good work and being known for it, today's idea of networking can feel artificial or even a little bit undignified. It's not because they're not necessarily good at talking to people, but because it feels forced. It feels performative. It feels like you're supposed to say the right things in the right order, and somehow, poof, it magically turns a conversation into a job lead. That disconnect is what makes networking feel awkward and, quite frankly, kind of cringy. My name is Doug with Career IQ. I'm a recruiter, a career coach, and I've helped thousands of people land jobs and build careers that they love. My focus is on helping people who have years of work experience make smart moves in what is a complex job market. If you want help leveling up your job search, I've got courses, coaching, and a free gift to get you started. Check out my link down in the description. Let's dig in. Here's a key point that we need to shift our paradigm about. Networking and job search is not about selling yourself or pitching your background or asking people for favors. It's not, "Hi, I just applied for a job at your company. Can you give me a referral?" It's more about building familiarity and context over time. When people know who you are and what you do and how you think, opportunities can tend to surface, but when they're not familiar and there's no context, those opportunities don't tend to surface. That's it. And when you approach it the right way, it actually feels more natural, more human, and surprisingly low pressure. Most people struggle with networking because they walk into conversations believing that they need to impress someone or prove their value quickly. And that pressure changes how we show up in that conversation. We can tend to talk too much and end up over-explaining our background and try to nudge that conversation towards jobs or openings. And even if we're polite about it, you know what? People can feel it and understand that there's an underlying agenda. The reality is, the people you're networking with, say hiring managers or recruiters or maybe even other professionals, are not uncomfortable with networking itself. They're uncomfortable with being pitched before there's any context or trust. They may, however, be open to conversations or sharing insight, and they're likely open to helping when it makes sense. What they're not open to is being treated like a shortcut. One way to approach networking is to think of it as a professional connection with shared purposeful information at its core. What do I mean? You're trying to start a conversation to ultimately gain insight into an organization and understand how decisions are made. What problems are teams trying to solve right now, and where your experience realistically may fit. When you approach networking this way, the conversation becomes useful to you regardless of whether it turns into a referral or not, and can remove a lot of the awkwardness because you're no longer trying to perform. When you reach out to someone, especially on LinkedIn, the most important thing that you can remember is that you're borrowing a few minutes of their attention. Don't try to be clever, just be clear. Clearly explain why you chose to reach out to them, maybe a connection that you two have, or a similarity, or maybe admiration for something that they've done, and not just that you want help. This can give your message some credibility, and simply be clear that you would like to connect with them on a professional level. No resume, no job request, no pitch. Your goal in this is to start a connection that leads to a conversation. Once the connection happens and your conversation begins, be careful to try not to dominate that conversation. Ask practical questions with depth. Ask what their role actually looks like day to day. Ask what skills or experiences tend to matter the most in their organization. Ask what they wish people understood about their field or their company before trying to break into it. These are useful questions. They also signal maturity and self-awareness. When it comes to talking about yourself, Be concise. You don't need to give your full career history or even a highlight reel. A clear summary of what you've been doing recently and what direction you're targeting is enough. And when you do this, lean into problem solved, not just titles. Explain things like you were brought in to lead through a change, or maybe build structure where there wasn't any. If you have a long track record, the temptation is to justify it. Resist that. People don't need a biography, they need to understand how you create value. This can help the other person mentally place you beyond just a title, and that can be helpful if they're ever going to think of you when an opportunity comes up. Once again, keep it simple. If the person wants a more detailed answer, they'll ask. Over-explaining is usually where this starts to feel salesy. You don't need to hide the fact that you're job searching, but you also don't need to center the conversation around that. Frame it in a way that you're being intentional about your next move and having conversations to better understand where your experience fits. You're gathering context before you make a move. At this stage of your career, as a more experienced worker or possibly Gen X, you're not just looking to be chosen, you're deciding where you belong. Framing like this shows that you're thoughtful and realistic and not desperate or maybe even passive. And take care not to drop the ball after that first conversation or that first connection. Obviously, you don't want to annoy them, but if you have a really good conversation and then you disappear, that typically builds nothing. Networking works through consistency over time, not intensity. And that's how you become familiar. It's also important to be realistic about scale. Networking that works is typically beyond just one powerful connection. The networking that we've been talking about here is what leads to job opportunities. You have multiple low-pressure conversations over time with a variety of individuals. People become familiar with you and your background, and when openings come up or when someone asks, "Hey, do you know somebody that would be a good candidate for?" your name comes to mind. That's how most roles are actually filled, not through intense outreach or constant asking. It typically happens through familiarity and timing. If networking has felt awkward or fake in the past, it's usually because we're trying to get something out of a conversation too quickly. When you slow it down and treat networking as relationship building rather than job hunting, it starts to resemble the way that reputations have always worked. People think of those they know and trust and respect, and it becomes much more manageable and far more effective. While you're here, drop a comment down below and tell me about your experience and what you've learned. I'd love to hear from you. And if you found this helpful, hit the like button, subscribe, and share the video. And once again, if you're looking for more direct help in your job search, check out the link to my website down in the description. Until next time.